There you go. Okay. It's a month of forgiveness, by the way, Ari, so you're fine. Anyways, the point is that that the travel today, the convenience of travel is something which we simply take for granted. There's so many. I mean, firstly, the fact that we can travel easily, that the thought that a location 15 miles away is at your fingertips. I mean, the way, perhaps more than any other area of life, or as much as any other area of life, the convenience and the simplicity and the safety of travel is how that has changed over the last however many years is enormous. And that's why when it comes to travel, when we look at the Talmud talks about travel. There's a prayer for travel, Tefillah Sadarach. Now, we still say that prayer, right? When you're going on a long trip, we say the Tefillah Sadarach. It's a beautiful prayer to say. But you can't compare the significance of the prayer as it is now to the way it was, I don't know, 100 years ago, a couple hundred years ago, where we pray in that small prayer, God, protect me, milistim, which is highway robbers, mechayas rosh, from wild animals, and from difficult terrain. We don't think about that nowadays. In the olden days, travel was dangerous. And therefore, one of the mitzvahs of taking care of a guest was walking them out of the city, guiding them to their next stop, which would thereby diminish the danger of travel. At least you're helping to guide them and give them directions from this city to the next city. And that's what we spoke about last week. What? You are good, but you're in familiar terrain. You're going back to your house. So the question is, what is the appropriate amount to walk someone to fulfill this mitzvah? How much should you walk someone as you escort them out of your house? What is the right amount to fulfill this mitzvah? And that's what the Gemara gets to at this point. So here at first, okay, let's start with an Agadah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said that when we have an interaction, before we have the famous Pharaoh with Moses, we have a previous Paro in the Torah. And that's Pharaoh who has dealings with Abraham. Abraham deals with Pharaoh. Pharaoh takes Abraham's wife, Sarah, because Abraham says it's my sister, and then it becomes evident that Sarah was not Paro's sister, was not Abraham's sister, but rather his wife. And it says Paro sends Abraham away. This is Abraham away. It says the Gemara, when Paro sends Abraham away, he also walked with him 4 steps. And the Gemara says, those 4 steps, he was rewarded that Abraham's children, descendants, were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. Furthermore, Amri Ludamarav, whoever walks his friend 4 cubits in the city is protected from harm. So here you have this idea of 4 cubits. And that's why till today, there are people, and again, today this mitzvah is less significant than it used to be, because today travel is much safer. When you walk out of someone's house, you don't feel in danger. But there are people who will observe this, that they will walk a person out of the house and walk with them 4 cubits. What is 4 cubits? Somewhere between 6 and 8 feet. Yeah. And thereby fulfilling this obligation. Now, the Gemara goes on to say that may be true about an average person. However, someone who has what about others? The sages here now tell us the amount of distance one should walk with a friend or with certain people. Harav l'talmid. A teacher to his student should walk up to Ibura Shel Ir, to the border of the city. Again, important to remember, we're talking about the olden days. A teacher to his student should walk to the border of the city. Chaver l'chaver, a friend to a friend, ad tchum Shabbos. So a teacher has a lesser obligation of respect to his student than a friend to a friend. A friend to his friend should walk not only to the border of the city, but an additional 2,000 cubits. 2,000 amos, maybe a half a mile. Talmud l'rav, but if it's a student escorting a teacher out of town, then ein lo shir, There is no measure for how much. In other words, you should go as long as you possibly could. When it's a student escorting a teacher out of town, they should continue walking as much as he could. The comma. So she says, but give me a number. What's the appropriate amount for a student to walk with his teacher when his teacher is leaving town? He says, ad parsa. Up to a parsa. A parsa is 4 kilometers. So the expectation is that a student who is walking his teacher should walk 4 kilometers. That's what? 2.5 miles? 2.5 miles? Escort his teacher 2.5 miles? And that's only Rabbo Sheina Muvak. That's if it's a teacher who is not your primary teacher. In halacha, you have 2 types of teachers. And then we're talking about Torah teachers. One is anyone who taught you Torah, where you have to have respect. And by the way, there's a lot of beautiful stories about people who showed respect for even their childhood Torah teachers. You know, people who themselves had at this point reached a much greater level of scholarship. But because this is their first grade, second grade Rebbe, they continue to show tremendous respect even later on in life. So there's that. There's the obligation to show respect to anyone who's taught you Torah. And then there's something called a Rabbo Muvhak. Rabbo Muvhak means that teacher who really gave you the wisdom for life. Some people have, and it's a beautiful thing when you see it, someone who is their life teacher. You can call it their mentor. That's what's Rabbo Muvhak. So you have to respect a teacher, anyone who's taught you. Certainly you have to respect anyone who's taught you Torah. But if you have someone who you can say, this is my mentor, this is the person who I go to with all my Torah questions, and that person, there is a much higher level of obligation of respect. And over here the Gemara says, the fact that you have to walk 4 kilometers, that's for just your teacher, average Torah teacher. But if you have a Rabbo Muvak, if you have a teacher who is your go-to for life, then you have to walk with them shalosh parsas, 3 times that, which is 12 kilometers. And this is the olden days. You didn't have a car. There's no motor scooter. You have to walk. You travel with them 12 parsa, 12 kilometers, 8-9 miles, and then you can go back home. Okay. Let's move on from this. The point is that there is this mitzvah to escort someone out of your home, and not just and as I mentioned last week, at the simplest level, and this is something we try to do in my home, that is that when someone is leaving the house, have someone walk them to the door. Because by doing so, you show them respect. You say, I care about you. Your presence is felt. The lack of your presence will be felt. Simply walking someone to the door is a simple fulfillment of this mitzvah of showing respect for a fellow human being. Okay, now the Gemara shares different people who walked with their Rebbes. Rav Kahana walked with Rabbi Simir Barashi from Pum Nahara to Beit Sinisa, which is a very great distance. And at that point, he says, now the Gemara records their conversation. Amar Lei, he turned to his teacher. Rav Kahana turned to his teacher, Rav Simi, and said, is it true, about which they say, Hanit Sinisa, that these palm trees have been here since the time of Adam Arishon, since Adam's time? Is it true? At that point, that would be thousands of years. He says, is it true these palm trees have been around since at the times of Adam? So he answered, Amar Lei, he said to him, you reminded me of something else. You reminded me of something that Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said, which is, what does it mean when the pasuk says, and this is a pasuk in Yirmiyah, there's a pasuk where it says, Be'eretz lo avar ba'ish, the land in which nobody passed, v'lo yashav adam sham, and nobody sat there. That's what it says in the Yirmiyah. In the land that nobody passed through, and nobody sat there. He says, doesn't that seem to be redundant? If you say that nobody passed there, obviously nobody sat there. And if you say nobody sat there, nobody passed there, what's the meaning behind it? Ella, he answered, Eretz shegazer aleha adam harishon leishav nisyashva, Eretz shelo gazer aleha adam harishon lo nisyashva. So it says basically, any land that Adam, the first human being, determined would become civilized, people ended up living there. Lands which Adam Arishon did not determine would be settled by people. People did not sit there. Okay, this is an agadita, this idea that Adam basically determined, Adam was the handwork of Hashem, and Adam determined this area of the world will be settled, this area of the world will not be settled. Does anybody know to what percentage of the world is settled by human beings? I don't know. Anyone know the answer to that question? Is it a large percentage, a small percentage of land is actually settled? So we have this tradition that Adam determined which areas of the world would be settled and which would not be settled. Right. Okay, I want to continue on to a very interesting and somewhat tragic story in the Tanakh, which the Talmud now discusses. So we are very familiar, the most famous prophet in Jewish tradition, you have Moshe, but the one who's known very well is Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. Who is it that succeeded Elijah the prophet? Who was the successor of Eliyahu Hanavi? His student, who saw him go up in a fiery chariot? That is none other than Elisha. So we go from Eliyahu to Elisha. And we're going to talk about a couple of stories that took place with the prophet Elisha. And one of them is a very tragic story, which has to do with bears mauling young men, teenagers, children even. What's the story? So he says, what's the connection between the previous topic? So here's what the Gemara says. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Meir, Kol she'eno melave umislave, anyone who does not fulfill the mitzvah of escorting people, walking them out of the city, ki'ilu shofech damim, it is similar to committing murder. In other words, it leads to murder. Why is that? She'ilmahu umale livuhu anshe Yericho le'elisha. Had the people of Yericho, which is Jericho, city till today, had the people of Jericho walked Elisha out of the city, lo gira dubim litinokos, the bears would not have attacked the young men, or even tinokos could be young men, it could be children. Anyone familiar with the story of the bears attacking the children of Yericho? All right.
Yeah, because they called them like bald or something, correct?
Very good.
Yeah.
The bear, they insulted Elisha. Well, what's the story? So the story is like this. Elisha, the people of, this is recorded in the book of Malachim Beis, chapter 2. The people of Yericho had a problem, that the water was extremely bitter. And they turned to Elisha for help. And Elisha arrived in the city and miraculously was able to cure or fix the bitter water, and the water was now drinkable again. Everyone should be happy, right? Not everyone was happy. Why not? Who would be unhappy with the fact that the water became drinkable? Anyone want to guess? People selling bottled water. Exactly. The people who had made a business out of bringing drinkable water into Yericho were very upset that Elisha, the prophet, the man of God, had come and solved their problem. And so therefore, upon his departure, Elisha was accosted by a group of young men, of youths. They ridiculed him, at which point Elisha turned and cursed them, at which point 2 bears, this is in the book of Malachim, check this out, book of Kings, chapter 2, Kings 2, chapter 2. At this point, 2 bears appeared and attacked the group that was insulting him, ridiculing him, killing 42 youth. And the Gemara here is saying that it's a harsh story. The Gemara here is saying is that had they walked him out of the city, this whole thing wouldn't have happened. Because if he would have been escorted with people, then they wouldn't have dared to accost him, to attack him, to curse him, to bother him, because he would have had an entourage with him. The fact that they didn't escort him, left him alone, walking alone, he was then a target of these young men, which led to them bothering him, cursing them, the bears, and all that. Fine. That's the story in the Talmud. Now the Gemara will discuss a little bit more about this story. It says he was leaving from Yericho, traveling to Bethel, to Beisel, and he was walking, and the youth from the city came out, and they started cursing at him. And they said to him, and this is what we mentioned earlier, alei kerach, which means which literally means go away, bald one, go away, bald one. Well, it says, what was the meaning of that insult? It's kind of a strange insult. So they say what they meant was, you have made this place bald for us. In other words, you have removed our source of livelihood from this town. Because they were the ones bringing drinkable water. And now he removed that source. Gemara says, these people were really youth, but they behaved like children. I'm going to skip a little bit to some of the pieces over here. But the Gemara says, Vayifen acharav, he turned around, Vayireim, and he saw them, Vayikaleim, and he cursed them. So Elisha turned around, saw these people who were abusing him or bothering him, and he cursed them. Says the Gemara, what does it mean he turned and he saw them? That seems to be unnecessary. Of course, he heard them. They were talking to him. So what does it mean he saw them? So Rav says, Ra'a mamish. He looked at them and he gazed at them, and his gaze, the power of his gaze, brought about a curse. He gazed at them. In other words, according to Rav, he didn't actually curse them. He just looked at them in a harsh manner. And we have this idea that the power of a prophet is such that even gazing at someone disapprovingly could bring upon them punishment. Now, it's important to point out that the Mefarshim say Elisha certainly didn't intend to have these youth killed. He was just looking at them in a harsh way. Why was he looking at them in a harsh way? Not because he was personally offended, but he felt they were attacking God. In other words, God was the one who sweetened the waters. Their rejection of the water was not a rejection of Elisha. It was a rejection of God's action. It was a rejection of God's miracle. Instead of celebrating the miracle of Hashem, what were they doing? Instead of celebrating the fact that they were worried that personal parnasa had been gone. I mean, think about it. It's this is probably true in any conflict. I know that the world is filled with conflict, and there's people who take advantage of conflict, people who make money off of conflict. And such people, listen, there's nothing wrong. I think there's nothing wrong if somebody in a situation of conflict has the opportunity and therefore brings, again, let's use this example for a reason. Let's use this story as an example. There is no proper water in town. All right, there's nothing wrong with a few opportunistic business people to say, we'll bring water and we could probably sell it at a premium because there's no water. I mean, it's not very kind, but there's nothing wrong with that. The question, though, is, would such a person actively push to keep the conflict going so that they can make money off the water? That's where an opportunistic, perhaps slightly insensitive person becomes a wicked person. If you're hoping and perhaps even acting in such a way that the conflict and the struggle and the suffering should continue so that you can make money, that's when it becomes an act of evil. And that's what these people were doing. That they were actively upset that now there was water for the town, water for the city, and that's where Elisha looked at them disapprovingly, not because of personal reasons, but because that exhibited a true wickedness that he looked at disapprovingly. His disapproving look is what led to the punishment that came afterwards. Yeah.
Other situations, say if someone's parnos, their well-being was affected, not in extreme circumstances, do they have a right to be upset about that, or like?
Yes, you're right. If someone's parnasa is hurt, that's true. They have a right.
They're trying to take advantage.
That's different. It's different. If a person's parnasa, again, I'm not saying, and again, if a person has parnasa because they happen to have water in a situation where there's no water, fine, okay. So you happen to have the water, but to then be upset when the city is blessed with abundance of water, that's where it goes from, like I said, being opportunistic to being wicked. Fine. Now the Gemara continues to discuss the story. What happens next? Quoting the verse. The verse states like this: "Vatitzena shtayim dubim min hayar." 2 bears came out of the forest, vatibakana mehem, and they literally means they tore apart, arba'im ushnei yiladim. 42 of these youth were torn apart by these bears. So now, Rav Ushmuel, there's a disagreement among the sages. Chad Amar, one says, Nes, this was miraculous. The Chad Amar, one says, this was a double miracle. Nes betoch nes, double miracle. What's the disagreement? Manda Amar Nes, the one who says it was just a single miracle, he says, Yar Hava, there was previously a forest there, but there were no bears there. Manda Amar, one opinion says no, it was a double miracle. There was never a forest and there was never bears. And therefore the existence of the forest was miraculous. The existence of the bears was miraculous. Why does this matter? Why does it matter that this was miraculous? The Gemara, so the Maharsha explains that by pointing out that it was miraculous, that proves that this event only happened because of their actions against Elisha. Now, as if there were bears there, and if there was there was a forest and there were bears, so then the fact they were attacked is unfortunate, but it doesn't in any way lend itself back to the fact that Elisha looked at them disapprovingly. The fact that there was no bears, or according to one opinion, there was no bears and no forest, and they suddenly appeared, that indicates that which took place was as a punishment for their actions towards Elisha. Now, according to the Gemara says, what's the necessity of? According to the opinion, it says there wasn't a forest, there wasn't bears. What was the necessity of a forest? After all you need is the bears. If God wanted exact punishment, just bears. Why a forest? The Gemara answers the be'isi, because if there's no forest for which the bears to escape to, the bears would not attack human beings. In other words, the only way a bear would attack is if there's a place to run to. So God created miraculously a forest, thereby giving the bears the courage, so to say, to attack, so that they could then escape to a forest. All right, interesting discussion over here. I guess we learned about the nature of bears. I don't know if anybody here has ever interacted with bears. What's the rule when you encounter a bear? You're not supposed to run, right? What's that? Scare him. Pretend to be dead. Is that what? Well, those are two different answers. Brown bear versus black bear. He's saying you are dead. A brown bear. And how do you know which is which? I mean, I guess. Okay. We'll have to try it. We'll do a. Yeah. Yes. Bear spray. That's it. So this time in Yericho, they didn't have. Oh, the female, forget it. Forget it. All right. Okay. Either way, this is the story over there. The bears were a miracle. The forest was a miracle. Fine. I'm going to jump a little bit over here to the Gemara because I want to get to the point which I focused on earlier. And we'll jump a little bit over here. The Gemara says, here's a very fascinating idea. Back to that story with Elisha. The Gemara says, Vayomru anshi ha'ir al Elisha. The people said to Elisha, this is again before Elisha solved their problem. There's the following pasuk. This is Malachim, Kings 2, chapter 2, verse number 19. Vayomru anshi ha'ir al Elisha. The people of the city, Jericho, said to Elisha, Hinena moshav ha'ir. Behold, this city, Tov, it's a good city. Kasher Adoni Ra, as you can see, it's a beautiful city. Vahamayim ra'im. But the water is bad. So, the Gemara raises what seems to be a pretty obvious question, which is, if the water is bad, and the land is causing people to die, literally, they said, behold, here's a nice city for you to settle in. But the water is bad, and the city causes people to die. How's that for a sales pitch for a city? Here, move here. It's a great city. I mean, the water doesn't work. People die here because there's no water, but otherwise, it's great. It's great. This is exactly the place where you should move into. So that's what the Gemara asks. The Gemara says, please pose the obvious question. If the water is bad and it kills the people, so then what makes it good? What makes the city good? How's that? How do they literally in the same breath say it's a great city, but the water is bad and people die here? What's that? Like Flint. Right. Got poisoned waters. We're in this lawsuit. But come here. This is a great place to live. You can buy a house for $10. So, Las Vegas. It's a sin city, so it's a good place, but it'll get you into trouble.
Killing people in the water is bad.
Right. So the Gemara offers a very interesting answer, which I think there's a lot of psychology to this answer. What does the Gemara say? Amar Rabbi says, Amar Rabbi Chanan says, Kain makom al yoshvav. Which means, what does Kain makom al yoshvav mean? A place is enjoyed by its inhabitants. People like the city they live in. And you come to enjoy the place you live. So much so that even if you have poisonous water, and even if your city which kills people, most people love the place they live. We complain about it, don't get me wrong. We complain about our cities. We complain about because we know firsthand all the problems. But there's this idea of Chein Makom Al Yoshva. You like the place where you live. You know, you hear about people always, what's the line that people say? There's no place like home, right? You may go around the world, you may travel to beautiful beaches, you may go to wonderful locations in the grandest hotels, but there's something nice about being home. And Chein Makom Al Yoshva, the place where you live is a place you come to love. And there's nostalgia, right? And therefore, even if you say the water is poison, it kills people, they were genuine when they said to Elisha, this is a good place, because people like their cities. Which leads us to the next Gemara, which says, along these lines, Amar Rabbi, Rabbi says, Shloisha chinoisein. There are three things which people, I don't know if the word is cherish, or people, there's certain things which people feel warmly about. There are three things which people are attracted to, things of their own, which they come to love. Things of your own which you come to love. What are they? Anyone want to guess? What are the three things you come to love, even if there's almost like I guess the word is there's a subjective love for three things. What are they? Well, we said one. Your home, your place. Chen isha al baila. A person comes to have a subjective appreciation and love, hopefully, ideally, for their spouse, for their wife. And chen mekach al mikchoy. When you buy something, you come to love it. In other words, we're subjective. All these things, I think the key point over here is that you have a subjective enjoyment of it because it's yours. You like your spouse, your wife, you like your city, and you like an item that you bought, even if everyone else around you says nothing special about this. But you will enjoy it. And it's healthy. It's the way it should be. A person should like those things perhaps more so than they actually are good. You should come to like those. You should come to cherish those things, your location, your house, one's spouse, and an item that you bought. There's I noticed over here, an interesting commentary over here from the Maharsha. Maharsha says, in explaining these three things, he says the common denominator of these three things is that we believe they are predetermined. The place you're going to live is predetermined by God. The person you're going to marry, predetermined. And that which you acquire in life is also predetermined. We have this idea that a person's choices are not predetermined, right? The choices between good and bad are not predetermined. But other things in life are predetermined. And therefore, God orchestrated that which is predetermined, that which is designated for you, is something that you will also come to like. Now, obviously, a person can buy an object and then come to dislike it. A person can get married and come to dislike their spouse. A person can come to a city and come to dislike it as well. That's true. And we're not saying that it's guaranteed you're going to love all these things. But in a healthy dynamic, in a healthy relationship, and in a healthy ownership, and in a healthy place that you live, you come to like that which you have, even in a subjective way, almost in a dishonest liking, that you like it, perhaps even though those around you may not say, well, there's nothing so special about this, there's nothing special about this that which you purchased. Nonetheless, God put it within our nature that we come to like our home, our homeland. We come to like our family, and we come to like that which we've acquired. And that's actually a very healthy thing, even if it is a little bit exaggerated, the like that we have. Okay. The next piece of the Gemara, with this we'll conclude, is another discussion, and it links to the story of Elisha. Tan Rabban, our sages taught, La'olam tehe small doicha v'yamin mikareves. A person has to have a dual approach when it comes to others, and that is even though sometimes there's someone who deserves rebuke, small doicha, which means a hand which pushes away, a person should also and always have the yamin mikareves, the right hand which embraces. So even if there's someone who deserves discipline, and sometimes harsh discipline, the left hand should do the discipline, the right hand should do the embracing. And the significance of that is the right hand is the stronger hand by most. And it's saying the right, which is the embracing hand, should be the stronger hand, even if there's a need for discipline. Right? So again, life is a balance of kindness and severity. The right and the left. Right represents love and kindness and goodness and giving. Left represents severity, discipline, toughness, justice. That's all the left. These are both necessary. If you're left-handed, that's a good question. If you're left-handed, I'm married to someone that's left-handed. What? But in Kabbalistically, right represents kindness, left represents toughness. It doesn't mean that someone who is right-handed is certainly kind, and someone who's left-handed is more disciplined. It just means that right represents kindness, left represents discipline. Both are qualities. It's very important to emphasize. Kindness and discipline, or toughness, love and fear, right and left, love and fear. It's a very broad umbrella that is under the right side and the left side, and both are necessary parts in how we deal with humanity around us, and certainly those who we are in charge of. The right kindness should be the stronger approach than discipline, even when you need to have both. Who do we prove this from? Gemara shares now two stories. The first is, who is it that, I don't know if the word fail, I feel bad saying the word failed at this, but who is it that did not follow this approach? Elisha. The first person who didn't follow this approach, who was a little bit too severe, is Elisha, who we've been talking about. Why? So you may think it's talking about the story of the children with the bears, but the Gemara here brings a different story. And that is Elisha, who pushed away his assistant, whose name was Gehazi. The story of Elisha and Gehazi, and also the other person, we'll get to that story in a moment, the other person who was too harsh and didn't express enough love was Yehoshua ben Prachya. That second story, which we're going to get to, is a story I was referring to when I shared this class, a story which the most Gemaras, if you look into, don't share this second story. Get to that in a moment. Let's start with the story of Elisha. Elisha Mahi. What is the story of Elisha? So here's a little bit of the backdrop. We shared one story of Elisha with the bears. Here's another story. And that is Elisha was a miracle worker. Elisha was a miracle worker. Really very few prophets who perform miracles like Elisha. He brought someone back to life. And one story was that there was a general whose name was Naaman. And Naaman, this too is in the book of Malachim, Malachim 2, chapter 5, verse number 23. Naaman was a general, not a Gentile general, and he was afflicted with saras, with leprosy of some sort. And he heard about Elisha. He heard that Elisha is a man of God, because none of the doctors were able to help him. So he heard Elisha, with his divine powers, can help you. So Naaman goes to Elisha, and he says, can you help me? And Elisha does, in fact, help him. I believe he tells him, go to a certain water and dip in those waters, and you go to the water 7 times. What? The Jordan River. He says, go to the Jordan River, dip in it 7 times, you will emerge, and miraculously your leprosy will be gone. And that's what happens. At that point, Naaman, as you can imagine, is overcome with gratitude. So he goes to Elisha and says, I'm a wealthy man. I can provide whatever you need. I can provide gold and silver, anything you want, I can provide. And Elisha says, no, this is simply, you should recognize the hand of God. And God brought you healing. You don't need to provide me with any gifts. I don't need any of your gifts. And Naaman went away. He was obviously extremely inspired, and he left. At which point, Elisha's assistant, this man named Gehazi, he couldn't handle the opportunity that was just lost. And therefore, he ran after Naaman, and he said, my boss, Elisha, has reconsidered, and he'd like to take your offer, your generous offer, he'd like to accept. And in fact, Naaman then gave Gehazi 2 talents of silver, along with 2 suits of clothing, which Gehazi kept. But Elisha knew about this. With his prophetic knowledge, he knew about this. And at this point, he cursed, what exactly the wording is, he rebuked him upon his return. When Gehazi came back, even though Gehazi did not say anything to Elisha, Elisha rebuked him. What's that? He knew. As again, he had this, it's Elisha, it's a prophetic vision. That's the benefits of being a prophet. You get to know these things. I always say that this synagogue is our organization is a non-profit organization. But back in the days, there was prophecy. So he knew, and he rebuked him. And what happened was that the leprosy that Naaman was healed from struck Gehazi, not just him, but his descendants, his children as well. So basically, he was afflicted with the very illness that Naaman had been healed by. So that's the story of Gehazi. Now the Gemara says, Elisha was a little bit too harsh on Gehazi. Firstly, the fact that he was struck with leprosy and his children were struck with leprosy. And that it was eternal. He says, he was eternally struck with leprosy. So he says, the Gemara says that was too harsh. Elisha should have been more compassionate. Even though he was deserving of rebuke, he should have been more compassionate. Yeah.
That is, it's like the bears.
Right.
Elisha call on bears and make a forest, or he took his curse and God, made a miracle for it to happen. Was that Elisha's,
Right, I'm trying to find the pasuk over here where it says. So the pasuk says, the pasuk over here is different. It's different. When it comes to the bears, you see that he just looked disapprovingly at them. Over here, the pasuk actually says that Elisha said to him, "V'tzara'as na'aman tidbak b'cho v'zarach ha'olam," that the tzaras will cleave to you. It's very different. And that's why, even though the episode of the bears, you could say is more painful, is more tragic, but that the Gemara is not pinning as much on him as opposed to over here, was very clearly in his anger. Now, the Gemara says, Elisha then went to Damascus. He traveled to Damascus. And over there, why did he go? Says the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan says he went to bring Gehazi back. He says, he traveled to Damascus to try to influence Gehazi to do tshuva. But Gehazi did not repent. Elisha said to him, Amar Chazarbach, do tshuva. Amar Loi, Gehazi said, I can't, because I have received a tradition from you, and that tradition is, Kol mi shechata v'hechti esarabim ein maspikim biyad lasos tshuva. Whoever sins and causes others to sin is not given the opportunity to do tshuva. And he says, since you've sent me away, I have gone down a very terrible path in which not only have I sinned, I've caused others to sin. The Gemara then goes on to list different sins he was involved with idolatry, and he was a brilliant man, this Gehazi. It makes sense. He was the right-hand man to Elisha. But he used his brilliance to deceive people and to lead them into a path of idolatry. And therefore, that's what he said to Elisha, that I can't do tshuva. He was wrong. It's much harder to do tshuva when someone has sinned and caused others to sin. But the door of tshuva is never closed. There is never a point in which a person cannot do tshuva. Fine. But let's move on to the second story. And again, the following 7 lines in the Talmud is edited out of most of the Talmudic versions until very recently. Very recently, we have sections of the Talmud which were missing in many Talmudic books for 1,000 years, and recently have been reinserted into the Gemara, and you'll understand why in just a moment. This is one of them. Another person, the Gemara says, who pushed someone away harshly, too harshly, who should have been more welcoming, even when there's discipline, there has to be also the right hand which brings people close. The other person, the other example the Gemara gives is Yeshua ben Prachia, who is mentioned in the Pirkei Avos. Yeshua ben Prachia, who lived approximately 70 years or so, or 60, 50 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. What is the story? The story is as follows. At some point during that period of time, the Romans were in control of the Jerusalem and the temple. And one of the kings that the Romans placed as they were able to place kings over the Jewish people. And one of them was a man named King Yanai. And Yanai got very upset at the sages because Yanai wanted to be the Kohen Gadol because he was a Kohen. The sages were opposed to him being a Kohen, and therefore there were rumors circulated about him. And he became so upset that he decided to kill the sages of his time. And he killed many of the sages. At that point, one of the those sages who escaped to Egypt. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia was one of the sages who escaped, and he traveled to Alexandria. He went to Alexandria in Egypt. One of the only sages who remained in Israel protected was a sage named Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach, because his sister was married to Yanai. So you've tried to keep track of what's going on over here. You have a wicked king named Yanai. Yanai is married to a woman whose brother is Shimon ben Shetach, one of the great sages. So she was able to protect her brother, that he was able to stay in Israel and be protected. But the other sages were either killed or they escaped. One of the sages that escaped, along with his academy, was Yeshua ben Prachia. And he ran to Alexandria. At some point, when there was peace in Israel, in other words, when there was no longer a threat by King Yanai, so Shimon ben Shetach, the sage who had remained in Israel, sent a message to Yeshua ben Prachia saying, Mini Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, from me, sitting in Jerusalem, the holy city, Lecha, to you, Alexandria Shel Mitzrayim, who settled in Alexandria, Achoisi Bali Shari B'toichech V'ani Yoshev Es Shreimema. My sister city, my master dwells in your midst, and I am sitting desolate. In other words, I'm here in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is desolate from Torah. It's not desolate from the sages. Yeshua ben Prachia understood that Shema Mina Havele Shalma. He understood, okay, there must be that things have gotten peaceful in Israel, and I can go back with my students. And he did. He took his students, and he traveled back to Israel. However, on the way home, as he was traveling from Egypt to Israel, Ikla Lahu Shpiza. He was traveling and he came to a certain inn. Kam Kamayu Bikara Shapir. The hosts of the inn saw their illustrious guests, Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia and his students, and they stood up and they gave them great honor. Avdili Yakaratuva gave him great honor. Yossi V'Kamishtaba. Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachia sat, and out of appreciation for the hosts, he was saying, Kamenach San Yezu. How beautiful is this host and hostess? What he meant was, how beautiful are their ways? How beautiful is the way they're treating us? One of his students, the student of Shimon ben Prachia, misunderstood his teacher's comment, thought that Shimon ben Prachia was actually describing the physical beauty of the hostess, and he disagreed. He said, Rebbe, and now Troy. He said, I don't think she's very beautiful at all. Her eyes are not very beautiful. To which Rabbi Shimon ben Prachia was extremely upset. Upset that this young man, his student, he expected so much more of him. This student was gazing at gazing and describing the beauty of the hostess, there, a married woman. Amar Loi, and therefore he severely rebuked it. He said, Rasha bekacha ta'isek. This is what you're thinking about. This is what you think that I was referring to. And he was so upset. He actually excommunicated him. Excommunication in Allah is a very severe punishment with severe repercussions. And he excommunicated him. They came back to the yeshiva in Israel. And this student, it says, every day, the student would approach his teacher to ask for forgiveness. Say, I want forgiveness for what I've done. But Yeshua ben Prachia was so upset that he did not accept it. Apparently, he felt this student was really out of line. You have to almost imagine the context of the situation, but he felt he was very upset at him, and he did not accept the student's return. Yom Echad. It happened one day. Havakara Kriyashma. Rav Shmuel ben Prachia was reciting the Shema prayer, right? We recite the Shema, we put our hands over our eyes, and we recite the Shema. The Shema is a very important prayer. We've been studying it earlier. Asala Kameh, and that student came to him at that moment to once again ask for forgiveness. Can I please return? Can you undo the excommunication? Havabedaiti lekabule. Gemara says that that day, Rav Shmuel ben Prachia actually intended to re-accept that student back into the academy. This was a day that he was going to welcome him back in. However, because he was in the middle of the Shema, he wasn't able to talk at the moment because you're in the middle of the Shema. You don't interrupt the Shema. So he basically said to him like this, basically saying, I'm praying right now. Come back in a minute. That's what he meant to say. But he went like this. The problem was, the student understood that he was basically saying, get away from me. And that was the last straw for that student. It says what happened is that student then left. Ozal Zokif Levinta Levena Palcha. He set up an idol and he worshipped that idol. And he was able to influence many others down a path of foreign worship as well, this student. Some point later in time, when Rav Shmuel ben Prachia met up with the student, Amar le Chazarbach, return. Amar le, to which he said, Kach mikublani mimach. I remember hearing from you. Kol achoito machtias harabim. Anybody who sins and causes others to sin does not have the opportunity to do tshuva. Gemara says, what exactly was his sin? The Amar Mar, as it was taught, Kishef, this student practiced sorcery, the Hesis, and incited others, the Hidiach, and led them astray, the Hechti es Yisrael, and caused the Jewish people to sin. And therefore he said, I can't do tshuva. Why is the story erased from most Talmuds? Because according to tradition, Yeshua ben Prachia was the teacher of Yeshua, right? Yeshua HaNotzri. Yeshua was a JC. We're in a shul. I have to be careful, certain names I don't mention in shul. But because he was the teacher of, we know that he lived during that era. We know that he lived during the end of the Second Temple era. And we know that he led many Jews astray. Tradition has it, Yeshua ben Prachia was his teacher. He was the student in the story. And he's the one that the Gemara says Yeshua ben Prachia should have been more welcoming to. He should not have been as harsh. We can play the what if game. If assuming the story is referring to that person, you play the what if. What if had he been more accepting? How would the world have been shaped differently? Who knows? So obviously we believe in divine providence that things happen the way they're supposed to happen. But that being said, the Gemara uses this story as an example of why one should be, even if one has to give discipline, there should be an added measure of kindness instead of just, it should be whatever discipline you're giving, there should be a little bit more love and kindness than the discipline that is necessary to give. And obviously that's a very practical lesson that we should take in life. And again, right. So that's some say this explains Yeshua ben Prachia's statement in Pirkei Avos, in which he says, "Asei lecha rav, knei lecha chaver," and vehavi donis chaver lekafskos. That you should, if you kind of take his statement in the context of his history, you can appreciate the depth of his the statement he says in Pirkei Avos. All right, we'll stop here. Thank you everyone for joining. God willing, we'll continue our Gemara studies next Thursday.
Zaku Baruch.
Zaku Baruch.
Thank you, Rabbi Shneur.
You're welcome.